Hey, it's Dustin, and I'm coming to you with another terminal walkthrough, this time of Chapter 5, and I wanted to do a special walkthrough for a special chapter. Chapter 5 is structured differently than the other chapters of the project, and it might be the most complicated, but it also might be the most impactful for a lot of you, especially if you're interested in storytelling and surrealism. Chapter 5 is titled Dreams, and it has that title because in Chapter 5, we're going to be reading our protagonist Tera's journal entries about her dreams. This chapter is different because it has to be different. Like any dream, it's not something that I want you to easily escape. You have to experience it. It's the one time in our story in which, for thematic reasons, I'm telling full stories, beginning to end. The same as our protagonist Tera wants the antagonist to follow her through these dreams of hers. And unlike in other chapters, you're not going to get hints at the correct input in all the outputs. This chapter flows from beginning to end, from the start of each story to its completion. All you're going to do is look for explicit use of words in the chapter's prompt. I am not what you see and hear. And you're going to follow the same structure as the inputs of every other chapter. Verb, second word with an optional third word. Only in this case, Tera's journal entries will tell you what input comes next. So if you've been passively going through the story until Chapter 5, you'll have to stop and read these outputs carefully. Chapter 5 is a cut screen at the beginning to tell you about Chapter 5 and how to get through it. And I'm going to show you some examples from the chapter itself. We're going to look at a story from the third stage of the chapter. Now, as always, I recommend you start the chapter by typing help. That's going to remind you of the chapter prompt, I'm not what you see and hear, and it's going to give you a manual that shows you how to get through the chapter. Now, this chapter prompt, I'm not what you see and hear, is a quote that Tera took from David Foster Wallace in his book Infinite Jest. And she has a lot in common with David, but most of all, they come from that same town, Urbana, Illinois. So she's channeling David in this prompt, using it to help guide her toward taking back control of her machine. Now, how specifically do we play Chapter 5? Much like a dream, it's easy to talk about, but it's complex when you're in the middle of it. You have three verbs this chapter: am, see, and hear. And here's the critical part. So bookmark this part or go back to it. To get through Chapter 5, you're going to look for one of the verbs and one or two of those other words from the chapter prompt in the output, which is a component of each of Tera's dream journal entries. But the order matters, and it actually makes things a little simpler for you as a player. You're going to look for where one of those three verbs first appears in the output. That's where you're going to start. So if you see one of the prompt nouns like I or what before you see one of those three verbs I just mentioned, am, see, or hear, ignore it. You're going to see one of those three verbs somewhere in that output. And then after that, somewhere in the output, you're going to see either one or two of those other words from the prompt. So make that mental or make that physical note of those two or three words, and then you're just going to combine them in the order you found them, and that's going to be your next input. Easy to explain, but it can be pretty tough to do in practice. And I know that because it was pretty tough to write. But this is exactly how you move through each of Tera's dreams. And these dreams come to you in complete stories that connect and build on the themes we've already seen throughout Terminal's first 4 chapters. To help you along the way, every story Tera tells is going to be written in a different color, and it'll be a completely different color from the previous story. Also, every story, every new journal entry here is going to start with the date it was written. Tera built this dream journal like any other journal that's reminding herself of the date as well as the content. Now we're going to walk through that process in one of Chapter 5's stories, one of my favorite stories of the entire project. We've just wrapped up one of Tera's stories here. Tera tells us that she wakes up feeling that there were several more hours of dreams she dreamt that night, but all she remembers is pure darkness. And this is one of those dreams that felt like something pulled from her real life. She's getting overlooked, and she's treated like she's incompetent, and by people that are incompetent and vain themselves. Now let's dig into the output, looking for those critical words. So right here, we have the word am. Now we don't spot the word see or hear anywhere preceding it, so we know that that must be the verb that's going to start our next prompt. And now that we have that word am, let's look for one or two more words from our initial prompt. I am not what you see and hear. Now we luck out in this one because we have those two other prompt words back to back, the words what and the word I. Now we put all those together, and what's our next prompt going to be? It's going to be am, what, I. And so we just entered that next. And as I said before, any new dream entry, we're first going to see that date. And in this case, it's January the 15th, 2019. And as the output goes, I'm on the runway for a flight to Chicago, where a sold-out crowd at Soldier Field will hear 90 minutes of me talking about the cross-contamination of technology with artistic rural life. I go on stage at 9 p.m. after an opening act of Bears-Packers playoff football. Now let's first discuss the substance of this opening entry here. We have Tera. She's on her way to Chicago to speak to a big crowd about, quote, the cross-contamination of technology with artistic life before watching playoff football. So we see that it's January in Tera's dream, just like it is in her real life. She's the center of attention, which she so often wants to be in her real life. And she's going to talk about technology's negative influence on both the arts and on rural life. Now, she also suggests that the opposite is true. We often think that that relationship goes one way, that technology can be this ugly thing that dominates our culture. But she's actually suggesting that there's something about rural life and something about the arts that does the same toward technology. Technology here taking the shape of some of its users. And for Tera, that's a form of contamination. It's a regular theme throughout the terminal text that technology and life have this mutual dependence, neither always good nor always bad. Now take a close look at that timestamp for each of these dream entries. Unlike in other chapters, these timestamps aren't going to guide you toward what you should type, but they still have a lot of significance that I hope you're going to try to uncover. And on January the 15th, 2019, we're a few days after Tera's 27th birthday. She was born in 1992. So when you play, try and piece together its significance based on what you've read in other chapters. Now let's see if we can find our next input so we can continue going with this particular story. Now we get an easy start here. It's going to start with am as the second word. So we start there. Now let's look for either one or two other words from our prompt. I'm not what you see in here. And we get one of those words pretty close to the verb am that we start with. And it's another verb. In this case, it's going to be the verb hear. The crowd's going to hear Tera at 90 minutes. We look a little farther down in this text, and we have the word I here in that beginning of that second sentence. We have three words. We put those three words together in order. We have am, hear, I. And so we're just going to enter that in the bottom. And we're going to get our next output here. And we see from the color, as well as the context of the output itself, that we're on to the next entry. It follows straight from the first. And it reads as follows. A couple of the flight attendants come by to ask me to put my seat all the way up. It already is. To buckle my seatbelt. It already is. And to put my phone into airplane mode before takeoff. It is not, though it never is. But I am the only one that can see that my phone is still in use, and it's practically off already with only my note application open. This output was a bit tongue-in-cheek on my part. I came up with this particular dream on a plane after the flight crew had asked us to turn on airplane mode for our electronics. Now, I follow that rule, but I was thinking at the time that I'm pretty sure many people don't, and so far I've never heard of a plane falling out of the sky because somebody doesn't have their phone in airplane mode, but maybe there is some serious electromagnetic interference that I've yet never encountered. And Tera herself follows all those other rules, except she decides not to put the phone into airplane mode for whatever reason. But let's turn our attention to the next input. So in the first sentence here, we don't have any see, hear, or am anywhere. But the second sentence, am, comes up pretty fast. The word am is going to be the anchor verb in this particular story, in this particular dream, as you'll observe. And like in the previous output, the second word's another verb that follows soon after, and in that case, it's see. And then we have a third word from our prompt, though it's going to be hiding from us in this case. Right after the comma here is the word and. Now remember that our prompt is, I am not what you see and hear. We have all of those words at our disposal. All of them are going to be used throughout the course of the chapter. But in this case, we have our three words that we put together in order. Am, see, and. And then we get our next output, and I'll read as follows. A couple of minutes later, the plane takes off, but during the ascent, my phone screen turns to white static like an old TV. I take a look around, and somehow none of the other passengers are even awake, and I am unsure why none of the flight attendants seem to see anything unusual about it. But I neither talk nor move, because those were the rules, and they gave us before departing. Now, as you might have guessed from exploring our previous output, airplane mode turns out to be a devastating problem for Tera, and what happens is surreal. Everyone's asleep, and Tera sees that snow-like static that used to come on CRT TVs when our signal went out many years ago. Yet amid all this chaos, the flight attendants are not only unbothered, but they're completely unaware. Also amid this chaos, Tera still follows all the rules. Now, what do we make of our next input here? So looking through this output, There's no C here or M in the first sentence, just like we saw in the last. The word I starts the second sentence. Now, another reminder, until you see those words, C here or M, those anchor verbs, just like any other chapter of Terminal, they all always start with an anchor verb. Ignore all of the words from the prompt until you see one of those three verbs. So we pass by the word I here, and then we pass by the word and as well, which is another word from our prompt, but not one of those anchor verbs. We have another and another I here, and we pass both of those by as well until we see the word am. Now we have our anchor verb. And now we look for one or two other words from that initial prompt. And like the last output, the second word from the prompt right here is see. And like the last output, we also have a third word, and in this case is the word I. Put those together, and what do we get? M, C, I, which generates our next output. My phone won't even turn off now, and after a few seconds, one of the flight attendants in the back of the plane starts to recite the emergency broadcast message that used to come on TV, and my phone changes from static to the colored vertical bars that would show during that message. I am unwilling to break any of the rules of the flight, even as I hear the other flight attendant interrupt her colleague to say that this message is anything but a test. So the flight attendant here appears to be in some kind of a trance, and we have another one of these old TV quirks. In the last output, it was at Snow White static, and now the flight attendant is reciting the emergency broadcast message that this is only a test message that's going to come on at random times, always to annoy you while you're watching football or watching Seinfeld. Except a different flight attendant says that this is definitely not a test. Now, Tera sees those vertical colored TV bars on her phone screen. So everything's going wrong on this flight, but Tera continues to follow every single one of the rules, except for that airplane mode that set off the entire course of things to this point. Now let's see what our next output can be. So much like the last output, we get the phrase, I am once again. Now, right there at the beginning of the second sentence. So we have our anchor verb here, am, to start out with. Then we have two words from our prompt that follow not long after the words I hear. So that tells us right there, we have all three of our words. So despite Tera's breadth of detail throughout all this, we have the next input closely packed together. And we put those words together ourselves, am, I hear, to get our next output. A moment later, the plane dumps itself down 90 degrees, and now we're hurtling toward Earth. Everyone is asleep except the flight attendants and me, and I am unable to wake anyone around me with any combination of shouting, shoving, or slapping. Yet as the flight attendants see me doing all this, they do not get up to intervene or help. So now things are getting serious, and all the passengers are sleeping through what seems like is going to be their last moments. The plane itself is in free fall, while Tera is doing her best to shock the other passengers into consciousness. The flight attendants sit there doing nothing, maybe aware and apathetic. They might be helpless, they might be scared, or they might still be in that trance. No passenger but Tera is even aware, and no one's helping Tera. The absurdity here is matched only by the level of terror that our protagonist Tera is experiencing. So within this output, let's look for our next input. So the word am is going to be our anchor verb here, but that's not going to be true of the rest of the chapter. Those anchor verbs are going to bounce around quite a bit. But we see the word am again here with am unable to make anyone around me with any combinations, etc. Now, as we move through that second sentence, we can add the word see right here. So we have am see so far. I mentioned a little while ago that some of the input words might be hiding from us, and you might have to take a second look through the output to find some of them. It's going to take a very close look in a lot of cases to really peel back what those two or three word combinations are. And especially it's going to be the case for words like not, words like and we have the word not here. So that tells us once again we have a three-word combination, the words am, see, and not. And of course we put those together to get our next output. My phone screen changes to solid crimson and starts to blare an alarm, and I'm about to throw it back at the flight attendants to rouse them. But when they hear the alarm, one of them, the one that announced the emergency broadcast message, uses gravity from the plane's steep descent to roll herself down the aisle to me and say, "Your phone triggered electromagnetic interference with the aircraft, which proudly kills thousands of people like us every single day." Now, things are getting worse here, but at least now the technology and the flight crew are responding. Tera's phone blasts out an alarm, which makes the flight attendant roll herself down the aisle. So we assume she's basically falling down the aisle since the plane itself is falling right out of the sky. The flight attendant said the emergency broadcast message in a trance. Now she seems to be in another trance here. She tells Tera that her phone caused the interference that killed the plane itself, and in Tera's dream world, thousands of passengers' lives are lost a day because of this, and the airliner actually uses it as a mark of pride. Now let's look to our next input. So in the second clause of the first sentence, we see the word am. Now we're going to start there, of course. Early in the second sentence, we see another verb here, and we have the word here. So we start with am here, we add that in. Now we don't see any other words from the prompt for quite a while, but tucked away in the second sentence is going to be a third word. It's going to be that word and. Now, as I mentioned, some of these words are going to be hidden, but we have once again another three-word combination with our anchor word, another verb, and in this case, that supplementary third word, that optional third word here. So we have the words am, here, and we'll write exactly that to get our next output. At that moment, our plane crashes headfirst into the ground, smashing me against a combination of the plane's front end and the earth itself. I bounce like a rubber ball back up through the plane and out the back, and am ejected into the sky, where I observe that we've crashed into an island not more than maybe 10 plane lengths in size. Now here's the terminal moment. The plane crashes, and since this is a dream, we witness dream physics as Tera bounces against the ground and up through the back of the plane into the sky. And she looks down on a deserted island with a diameter of only 10 plane lengths. It's basically like every island we see in fiction, something that's barely large enough to hold life. But in this case, we're going to see that there's plenty of life here. Now let's look for the words in our next input. And none of the verbs, those anchor verbs, MC, or here from our prompt, are in the first sentence. But in the second sentence, we have our first verb, and it's once again going to be that verb am right here. And shortly thereafter, we have the word I. Do we have one more word from our next output? In this case, we actually do. We have the word not tucked here at the end of the sentence too. So we put those together to create our next input. Am I not? Somehow I land on my feet in soft sand that must have absorbed the force from my fall. I am fine, perfectly fine, but can see that everyone else on the flight has been crushed underneath what is left of the plane, which now looks like a flattened pop can about 100 feet from me. Tera survived, and not only that, she's uninjured. The island sand seems to have braced her fall, yet everyone else was crushed like a can right in front of her. And much like in real life, Tera's now left alone. Only in this dream, that absurdly makes her the lucky one. But we're going to learn shortly that she's not alone at all. Now, let's look again for our next input. So early in the second sentence, we have the word am, once again. And shortly thereafter, just after the sentence break here, we have the word see. And then a little bit later, we're going to find the word what. So we have another three-word input. We have am, we have another verb, see, and then we have that closer word, what. I collect myself for a moment, brushing off the sand on my arms and legs, but I am startled to hear a snipping sound right behind me. Turning around to see Dad in a heavy flannel with Carhartt jeans despite the heat. He's trimming tropical flowers with his old grass shears. So Tera finds her dad here. Despite the heat, despite the location, he looks just like he always did. He's wearing a flannel and he's wearing jeans, and he's doing what he always did. He's tending to the yard, only here it's tropical flora instead of that familiar Illinois grass. Now, she doesn't see him at first. She hears him behind her snipping the shears. But really nothing about this place seems right to Tera except her dad. But maybe that's enough for Tera to be happy here. Now, this is where I'm going to leave you in this walkthrough. It's going to be a relatively short one. But you now have a sense of how to deconstruct each output and then use it to set up that next input. And like I said at the beginning, Chapter 5 is unique. It's the only chapter style is this way because it's going to treat dreams as they often are, as complete stories. And I really think you're going to get a lot out of these stories. I intentionally saved some of this stories so that you can experience it for yourself, because I think once Tera finds her dad in this story, things take on a really interesting but also very deep sense, and it ties up a lot of the themes we've seen between Tera and her dad in a really interesting way. And really, throughout Chapter 5, these are some of my favorite pieces of writing in Terminal, and really some of my favorite pieces of writing among anything. And I think of Chapter 5 as really the thematic centerpiece of the entire project. Here's where much of what you've encountered earlier all coalesces, all comes together. So first off, remember to start each chapter by typing the word help. Always start out that way. That's going to let you see that initial prompt. I am not what you see in here, just as you would for any other chapter. As well as a short manual that's going to walk you through this chapter style, just the way I did now. It's going to give you kind of a brief description of how to get through chapter 5, in the same way that any other help menu of any of the other chapters will give you that brief guide as to how to get through it. Now, I've also provided you some resources on the project website, and that's www.terminal-fiction.com. And you're going to find materials to help guide you through this, as well as all the other chapters of Terminal. Now, I really think this might be the most difficult chapter of Terminal, which is really why I wanted to do this walkthrough. Plus, it's just stylistically different from all the others. So I really encourage you to work through it and to challenge yourself. But if you just want to read this chapter in full, you want to see all these dreams laid out in full and in sequence as a kind of a single narrative story, you can always type full text and see it laid out in a single screen. Just like in any chapter of Terminal, if you type full text, you'll see the entire set of inputs and outputs for that chapter laid out for you. Now remember, these latter chapters in particular, chapter 5 and so on, are especially long. So there's going to be a lot of text for the platform itself to pull up when you type full text. So it might take you longer than you expect for that screen to pop up after you enter full text. Now that's perfectly normal. Just give it a little while to load, particularly if you're using an older device. But I'd really recommend trying to get through the chapter on your own, unless you're really truly stumped, because I think you're going to find chapter 5 especially rewarding. So thanks for walking through some of this chapter 5 text with me. So in a moment, I'm going to put a QR code on the screen that's going to take you to the Terminal Steam page. And I really hope you have fun with the game and get a lot out of these stories. So thanks.